Hey everyone, this is Brian from the Tennis IQ podcast. Josh and I hope that you are enjoying the content and discussions that we put out week after week. If you'd like to support the podcast and help us to continue to produce quality episodes, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Currently, we have 3 tiers of support: the fan level at $3 per month, the supporter level at $7 per month, and the champion level at $20 per month. Benefits of joining the Tennis IQ podcast community include episode transcripts, participation in book club discussions, and access to monthly masterclasses with me and Josh. For more on these benefits of support, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Thank you so much. And now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Josh Berger.
And I'm Brian Lomax. And today Josh and I are going to have a conversation with Peter Clarke. So Pete Clarke is a former professional tennis player who was born in Ireland and moved to Australia at the age of 6, where he developed his game to become one of the best juniors in the country. He went on to play professional tennis on the ATP Tour, and as a professional player, he achieved a career-high world ranking of 229 in 2002. It was during his playing career that Pete began his transition to coaching and business as a means of funding his journey on tour. Once his playing days were complete, Pete had developed the skills necessary to become a successful business person. Today, his mission is a new venture called CoachLife. Now, CoachLife is the premier online resource for tennis coaching knowledge. It is an extensive library that covers tennis-specific nutrition, footwork, sports psychology, coaching, parenting advice, and detailed shot progressions. You can sign up for a free 7-day trial at CoachLife.com, and listeners of the Tennis IQ podcast can get a special discount on their first-year subscription by clicking on the referral link in this episode's show notes. In this conversation, we'll talk to Pete about his life in tennis, how he transitioned to coaching and business, and about the transferable skills that competitive athletes can use to be successful after their playing careers. We also discuss CoachLife in some detail and why Pete is so invested in this mission. Josh and I know that you'll enjoy this conversation with Pete Clarke. Well, we are very pleased to have Pete Clarke joining us today. Pete, welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. And as we usually do with our guests, we'll start off by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself, especially your tennis journey. And really how you have arrived at the point where you are in your business, and then we'll get into some more details about your tennis career and your business career. But would love to hear about how you got started in tennis and where that took you in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born in Ireland to Irish parents, and when I was 6, we moved to Australia. I started playing tennis and had a pretty successful junior career. I rose pretty quickly to become one of the best juniors in Australia. I was playing in the same junior group as Leighton Hewitt, although he was 2 years younger than me. But once we got to 18, he was number 1 in Australia. I was number 2. And at about 17 years old, I'd already reached about 400 in the world. But unfortunately, Tennis Australia was going through a transitional period, and there wasn't really a lot of financial help or coaching. It was only a couple of guys that were getting help. I think Hewitt had maybe a private sponsor in Adelaide. So I was struggling, and I was just traveling around the world on my own, 4 or 5 guys to a room, really trying to make ends meet without a coach or anything like that. And then there was an opportunity to go back to Ireland at 19, play Davis Cup for Ireland, and I got some financial backing there, a little bit just to help me. But yeah, it was a struggle, and I ended up playing on the tour on and off for the next 10 years.
And what were some of the highlights? I know you mentioned Davis Cup. What were maybe some of the highlights or milestones, both during your junior career and during your professional career?
Yeah, so as a junior, I put in a lot of work. I was really driven, didn't have a lot of coaching or help. I did a lot of it myself. And I didn't play a lot of junior tournaments outside of Australia. It's difficult to travel because we just didn't have that financial backing to travel outside of Australia. And right when I left to go back and play for Ireland, the legendary coach Craig Tiley became the head of Tennis Australia. And, he's amazing. He set up a system and there was a lot more coaching and help. And that's when they produced players like Nick Kyrgios, Ash Barty, and I think they have 8 or 10 players in the top 100 now. But yeah, during my career, I got to 200, 220. I was extremely volatile on the court. I look back with a lot of regret. I threw it away, really. So every match I had a problem with something with the umpire. And, looking back, it sort of stemmed from my junior career with my parents. I had a lot of pressure. And I think that stayed with me. Outside of tennis, it was great, but it was the usual thing where you get yelled at in the car on the way home, and that sort of played a part in that volatility that I had when I was playing on the tour. It just sort of affects your self-worth, I guess, that winning or losing, you feel like less of a person. And it wasn't until the end of my career. I think I quit at 24. I made the last round qualies of the US Open, had match point, and it's just a volatile guy all around. Went out, got into a fight at a bar, broke my jaw. I was so intense. Tennis was just, it was an experience that wasn't always enjoyable. I mean, I love the tennis part of it, but just losing, it would just be 2 days in my room being depressed that losing was the worst thing in the world. And I just didn't really stay on that even keel emotionally. So I retired pretty young at 24, got into coaching. And then while I was coaching for a couple of years, I sort of figured it out. I realized that, well, it's just a game. You just have to enjoy it. Normal life isn't the easiest thing. I'd rather be out there on the tour. So I went back with zero ranking and went from 0 to 300 really quickly after a year and a half off. And I was a completely different player. I'd figured it out. It was just, it didn't matter if I lost. I was just enjoying the moment. I was present. But unfortunately, then I got sick and I had a mystery illness and I had to retire that last time. So. But yeah, like I had some good highlights, some good wins over top 20, top 10 players, top 100 players. I played all the Grand Slam qualies, Davis Cup, won some big 5-setters in Davis Cup. Everyone thinks they could have done better, but I feel like I had a lot of talent. I had a big serve and a big forehand. But yeah, every single match, if anyone would talk to you about, oh, do you know Peter Clarke? The first thing they would say was, oh, that guy was crazy. He was nuts, that guy. But yeah.
But then you figured it out, which
Yeah.
is in some ways reminiscent to a younger Roger Federer too, right? Because Roger mentioned that it took him about 3 years on the tour to figure it out himself. And I'm not saying that you're comparing yourself to him. I made that comparison, but after that, his career was obviously, the trajectory was very different than it was. Can you talk a little bit more about so you figured out enjoyment being part of it, being in the moment, being a part of it, because your first answer kind of resonated with me with some episodes that Josh and I have had around performance-based identity versus a purpose-based identity, and many players their self-worth is often determined on their performance, the winning and the losing, and as opposed to like, what's my purpose for playing. I'm curious if you could give us a little bit more about exactly what you figured out, because it just sounds like you brought a much more mature perspective to that next, after that year and a half off, to what you did.
Yeah, it was just becoming a better person as well when I started coaching and interacting with people, because I started on the tour. I left school at 14 or 15, went straight onto the tour. We didn't have the internet then. So, and I was just around tennis players and athletes, although you mix with people of different cultures, of course, but being in the normal world and becoming a better person made me realize that, I was treating umpires and my opponents badly on the court. And that was something that I should stop doing. That was part of it. And then just because I didn't have that financial backing when I was playing, there was always that pressure. And also there was a stigma attached to not going to college. I'd left school early to go straight onto the tour. So it was always sort of comments that you get, well, what are you going to fall back on? What will you do when you finish tennis? And then when I retired the first time and I started coaching, I did really well. And I was able to run a successful tennis coaching business and make good money. So I knew that that was there. I knew that I had something to fall back on. And that definitely helped. And I can talk more about that after. And then just that it was okay to lose. I was still the same person. The sun was still going to come up the next day. And I just had to give my best, just no matter what, give my best. And yeah, it was just those three things that, and then I just wanted to fulfill my potential. This was like my second chance. I'd squandered it the first time. This was my second chance to come out and just give it my absolute best and make amends for what I'd done. And then obviously I thought about my childhood and what had happened there. You know, I remember I played a match against a kid that had beaten me 17 times in a row. And my parents were watching, and I lost the first set and they left because, you know, shaking their heads, they'd left disgusted that I was losing, and then I beat him, right? So it was just becoming introspective when I retired that first time and thinking about those experiences and what happened, and yeah, just being okay with losing. I was still a good person. I still had a lot of friends and family that loved me, and it was just a game. And I had money, which made it easier. So I didn't have that pressure because I'd saved up money coaching and I was able to afford playing on the tour.
It's very interesting. We recently had an episode with Ryan Harrison, who recently retired from his career, went into coaching, and actually I think there's some overlap there where he, I think, recognized, maybe later in his career, but also as he became a coach, some of these, some of the similar conclusions in terms of, it can't be all about winning, and that, he was putting a lot of pressure on himself and, viewing things in more of a result-oriented way. I'm curious if as you, either in that time when you were coaching between your two stints on tour or afterwards as a coach, how you convey that to players that you work with, some of those conclusions that you took away.
Yeah, exactly. And you talk about being results orientated, and you did ask that in the last question, and I didn't really answer that, but I was more focused on the process, and it helped being a coach, and being able to analyze games more, because when I was coaching, I was analyzing someone else's game. So, and I was more intent on improving every day. So it was a process of just not worrying about results, just worrying about the improvement of my game, of working on specific things rather than going out and hitting balls. But yeah, I mean, when I came off the tour, the second time I coached for a couple of years, and I coached a lot of junior players, and yeah, that was the message that I was sending.
Yeah, and most likely to their parents as well, right? Because they're getting a lot of that, and you had received that kind of maybe pressure from your parents also. As you're talking, Pete, I'm also thinking back to an episode we did about the challenges of being a professional tennis player. There's some unique aspects of being a pro in tennis as opposed to, say, a professional, soccer player, or, Australian rules football player, where you have contracts and you have facilities, and you mentioned 5-6 guys to a room. You maybe just playing for your next meal. There's very little off-season time. What are your thoughts on how that affects the mental state of players, and some of the other challenges, and even how you try to prepare some of the people that you work with for, the harsh reality of what it means to be a professional tennis player?
Yeah, and it's a great question. Although it's a harsh reality, when you stop playing, you get this different perspective that it actually is amazing. You're traveling around the world, you're doing what you love with like-minded people that are your best friends, and you just need to enjoy it a little bit more. But definitely players need to supplement their income with club tennis and, in Germany, or French money tournaments. And it's all changed now. The money has got a lot better. It was a real struggle then, but, players like Djokovic have managed to make that change. And there seems to be, the top 250 players in the world now are on a contract, and I think they're going to make a minimum of 150,000 a year, which is great. I mean, I think I made 80,000 my whole career. But, when I came off and I was coaching, I set up little businesses and with the profit going towards the players that I was coaching. And then I was able to travel with them and continue to coach them. Like we played at a gym and the tennis center was there. So I set up a mobile car wash in the gym with all the proceeds going there. So I think players, there's ways to raise money and find like-minded people within your community and your club, sponsors, and they tend to be pretty similar. Like successful business people tend to be very like-minded to top junior players or top young touring professionals. They would have similar sort of mindsets. So just looking to supplement your income, knowing that at different times it's okay to coach. And I just wish that I would have gone to college. I think that's a great route. Physically, I was very underdeveloped, and I think that would have helped a lot in terms of maturity as well. So I think that, and it's okay to go onto the tour, but you've got to make sure you have that structure in place where you're strong enough, you're mature enough in a lot of ways, and you have that financial backing. Otherwise, I would say go to college, do the 3-4 years. Because also when you're at college, you tend to meet a lot of sponsors and boosters within the college, and that sort of helps. And then when you're at college in the US, you're off for 2-3 months in the summer, so you can still play. You can play tournaments during the fall or during different seasons during college. So I think that's definitely a great option, but the money definitely has gotten a lot better. I mean, I was speaking to one of my friends the other day. We were at both of our daughters were playing in a junior tournament, and he got to about 350 in the world. And I said, "Oh, it was a real struggle financially." And he said, "No, I made 80,000 a year." And I said, "Well, how did you do that?" And it was, he played French money tournaments and he played German club tennis. So he supplemented his income doing that, and it was a couple of months every year. So I think if you're a young player and you're organized, and let's say you're from the States, go play club tennis in Germany on clay. That's on the weekends. Play some French money tournaments during the week. Spend 2 months on clay, make a lot of money, and then continue to play on the tour after that.
No, I think that all makes sense. I question how many, players that are up and coming players, whether they've been in, at the college level for maybe a year or two, or whether they're, 17, 18, starting their professional journey. I wonder how many of them really understand that pathway and understand the different sources of income that there are available, whether it's through sponsors, whether it's through different money tournaments, or some of the club tennis routes in Europe. Because yeah, as Brian mentioned, there really are a lot of challenges of professional tennis, whether it be the fatigue, both physical and mental, whether it's sort of that nomadic lifestyle, just there's whether it's the risk of injury, and then what happens if somebody's off the tour for a few months. Just so many different challenges. Have you seen, other than the financial piece, have you seen a difference in terms of maybe some of those structures, or just in terms of some differences between the time when you played and currently?
Yeah, I think that there's so much societal pressure that, well, what are you're seen as a bum? You're 400, 500, 600 in the world. You're 23 years old, and what are you doing? And I think that's completely wrong. You learn so many great skills playing tennis. You have that singular focus on one thing and giving 100%, and you'll be able to translate that into anything else you do when you finish playing tennis and become successful. But yeah, like, to answer your question, I mean, the money's a lot better. I think there's so many tournaments in the US, for example. There's no need to travel in a lot of those major countries. Like in Australia, when we were playing, there was, a handful of futures and one challenger every year. So we had to travel and we were gone all year. Whereas if you're in the States, you're just a couple of hours flight or a drive away from somewhere. You can always come back to your family and your base and your coach every couple of weeks, and you can stay with housing. You could stay in housing with families, and it tends to be cheaper. But I haven't been on the tour in a long time, so I don't know what they've set up for players in terms of helping them deal with that. It's been 15 years since I've been on the tour, but I just think that the message is just keep that improvement mindset as a player. Know that you'll be just fine when you finish playing. All my contemporaries, colleagues that I played with on the tour that didn't end up going to college have all been successful in their own right in different things. And you just take what you learn as a tennis player, traveling around, meeting people, dealing with people from different cultures, different backgrounds, that singular focus, giving 100%. And yeah, you'll be fine when you finish. So play as long as you can, because right now I'm 45 years old and I would give anything to be back playing tennis on the tour. So
Yeah.
it's just a perspective. I mean, I met a girl who's playing on the tour and her father, and the first thing they said was how hard it was, and it was so difficult. And if someone gave them 10 million right now, they would take it and stop playing. And I just thought, well, that's the wrong attitude to have, because you have to love it. It has to be about enjoyment, and you have to enjoy the journey. The journey is everything. And even if you think it's a grind now, maybe you're just mired in a negative mindset, and you just need to get out of that and fast forward to when you're 45 and you have 2 kids and you're going to daycare. And so, yeah.
All right. That your answer there really resonates, Pete, in terms of, are you focused on the money and the rankings and that stuff, or are you focused on simply enjoying what you're doing and seeing how good you can get, and the learning and the improving? Yes, which is sort of reminiscent of Eric Buderak and his TED Talk about dreaming small and those daily things. Because he discussed in that talk a lot of the same sort of challenges that you had, and he did go to France. He did play French money tournaments and so forth. You also just mentioned translatable, transferable skills, and being successful after. And how many of your friends are all successful in what they're doing. Let's talk about the transition that you've made, from player to business person, some of the skills that you learned in tennis, both, really maybe even more from the character side than anything, that's been helpful in you becoming, more successful in your post-playing career.
Yeah, absolutely. So right when I came back the last time, I had a sponsor, and at the time he was a billionaire, an Irish billionaire, and we became friends. We were best friends. He was amazing. And he just gave me some advice that, he keeps it in the day. That was what he said. And that really resonated with me. He would just do everything he could in that day. He wouldn't look too far ahead. He wouldn't look, if he had a project that he was a developer, so he was building the biggest buildings in the world. So rather than starting a project and thinking, oh, I'm getting overwhelmed, he would just do everything he could that day, and I guess being present. And that really helped me. And then once I was able to start to have that attitude, because I remember a coach talking to me, he wasn't a coach, he was a player when I was younger. He was top 15 in the world, Wally Massour. And he's like, well, it feels like, Pete, you want to be there tomorrow. You're so intense. It's just like, just relax, enjoy the process. But at the time, I wasn't equipped to take that advice. But it was the same sort of advice that I'd gotten from the billionaire, that just be present, keep it in the day. So I used that when I stopped playing. I coached for a couple of years, and then I got into business, various little businesses, and worked my way up and was quite successful in business. And I just, again, used that singular focus as you're growing up on one thing, and the correlation between how much work you put in and the results you get, and just the ability to give 100%. So I think a lot of people think that they're giving 100%, but are you really doing everything you can? So I was able to do that, and just the ability to analyze your game when you're playing tennis. You're analyzing your strengths, your weaknesses. You're getting different people in to help with different parts of your game, a sports psychologist, a nutritionist. So it's the same when you go into business. It's having that mindset of, I don't know everything. I need to learn. I need to be open to it, really open to learning. So I just felt like and I still do, that I have a superpower that anyone that I'm able to meet, I can learn something from. So when I meet them, I'm able to, pick their brain and get their knowledge, and then it's my knowledge. So, and that's what tennis players do, right? You see them on the tour, they have 2-3 coaches, they switch coaches after a year. Well, the Emma Raducanu development method when she was a kid, she had all these, she'd take different pieces from different coaches and adapt it to her game. So, and then just the ability to deal with people, to be able to talk to people and deal with people from different backgrounds, different cultures, because that's what business is all about. It's about people. And then also the ability to deal with pressure. So many times in business, you just have, two people quit the same day, your website goes down, the server crashes, someone's threatening to sue you. I mean, I had a business in Ireland, and there were 7 different government agencies over the course of 3 years tried to come in and shut us down and say we were doing something wrong. And and it's pressure, and you've got to just be able to keep calm, and you learn that from tennis and keep it in the day. So it's just all those skills are really transferable. So even if you don't become a professional tennis player, I think parents just need to understand that playing tennis and competitive sport is such a great thing for their kids, and don't ruin it by taking away the enjoyment and putting too much pressure on them.
I think you bring up a great point about the pressure piece and just the role that parents have. And I know there's certainly parents listening to this, and and we've talked I think we've talked at length about this, just in terms of ways where obviously people care about results, but the more that we can stay focused on doing things the right way, focusing on our process, focusing on those things that are actually in our control. Not only do athletes enjoy their sport more, not only do athletes end up playing better, but they end up winning more. So it's sometimes, if we don't focus as much just on that end result and focus more on on staying present, as you said, getting it done within that day, doing our best that day, trying to get 1% better, that ends up leading more to the types of results that we want anyways. Yeah, if you could tell us a little bit more about sort of your post playing career, and and what you're doing now, and maybe that could we could transition a little bit to CoachLife, and you could tell us a little bit more about sort of how that all started, and what's and what that journey has looked like, and also where things are at right now.
Yeah, after tennis, I coached for a couple of years, like I said earlier, got into business. I've had a pretty good career over the last 12 years, but my daughter started playing tennis at 10 years old as a complete beginner. And I realized how much I had to learn. And that's when I had this idea of CoachLife. So CoachLife the concept is the junior coaches to the best players in the world. So we have a platform with 22 coaches on there, with the junior coaches to Nick Kyrgios, Coco Gauff, Iga Swiatek, Taylor Fritz, Tommy Paul, Francis Tiafoe, some of the best players in the world. And it just sort of stemmed from that there's a lot of information out there. Well, you're not sure, is it the right information? Are players doing it? Is it working? And you go onto YouTube, and there's so much information, and it's hard to put it together. So I wanted to create this platform just to be able to coach her in a better way, which I've done, and she's been improving a lot. So, over the last, I think, 6 months, she's probably gone from, she's a 5 UTR, but she's won the last 3 tournaments she's played in the last 6 months. So I think she's closer to a 6 UTR. Sound like the typical tennis parent, right? So, but since I've started dealing with building CoachLife, she's gone from a 3 to a 6 UTR. So just with me implementing all the learnings and drills from that. So yeah, that's why I started CoachLife. It's a brilliant platform. We just launched it 2 months ago. We have experts in nutrition, strength and conditioning, a tennis specific footwork specialist and over 360 videos from some of the best coaches of all time. And just relating it to what you guys do, like we have 35 videos specifically for parents. That's one of the questions we would ask all the coaches, how do you deal with parents? What are the parents' role? And it's just fascinating. One specific example I would give would be Denis Shapovalov's junior coach, Adriano Furivia. So Denis's mother actually coached him until he was 12 or 13 years old, built all his techniques. She was amazing, but she realized that she wanted to keep their relationship for the future. So she got Adriano involved. She stepped aside, which I thought was great. And then Adriano wanted to build a mental toughness in Denis. So they got some shirts printed up saying, "I'm not in the business of excuses." So, which I thought was just brilliant. So no matter what, in practices, matches, he was never going to make an excuse. If he came off the court and there was something wrong with the balls, or he got cheated, or he didn't feel that good, or he didn't sleep that well, he didn't make excuses. He didn't make excuses to himself. He tried to win with what he had on the day. Do your best with whatever, because that's what it's like when you play on the tour, you play college tennis. You're never 100%. You have to fight and find a way to win. So instilling that from a young age, and he used to, he talked to Dennis's mom, which wasn't difficult. She was on board with it. But parents can't make excuses for their kids too, because, you see parents come off the court. How did your son go? Oh, he lost, but it was really windy, or it was. So yeah, it's those sorts of lessons that you get from CoachLife. Fascinating lessons from the best coaches in the world who have coached. We have Iga Swiatek's coach. He worked with her from 9 to 16. He has a 25-minute video talking about her coaching evolution. It's the best tennis advice you'll ever see. And, he talks about a specific example of Iga would hit drop shots every time she would play. So, she came off the court and he was saying that, Iga, why are you hitting so many drop shots? You're hitting. And then he thought about it and he thought, well, he's stifling her creativity there. He should just let her be and let her go out and play the game she wants and develop that as part of her game. So it's just these fascinating little lessons that you get. There's a whole section for advice to coaches. There's 30 or 40 videos there. We have a section for aspiring junior players, and there's 40 videos there with videos such as a developmental plan, how to build a high-level training week, and you get insights on how these players trained when they were younger. Kyrgios only trained 15 hours a week, whereas Coco Gauff trained 6 hours a day. Iga Swiatek, on the other hand, it was just 3 hours a day. And, he runs you through a typical session, exactly what they would work on in a 3-hour period. So, and then you just start to see common themes within the content, which is really helpful. So racket head speed would be an important thing to developing a weapon, and we have a whole category on developing weapons, but you see 6 coaches would make racket head speed a priority in every session. So it starts to confirm certain things. 6 of those coaches were doing it. They've developed the biggest forehands in history. That's what I need to be doing. So yeah, we're excited about the site. We think it's great. We're adding one new coach every month.
Yeah, and we obviously had a chance to talk to Dave Bailey. We had a brilliant conversation with him, and I think in some ways the footwork aspect of tennis doesn't get enough. I don't know if it's respect, but it needs more, right? I mean, if you're going to be a great player, there are certain, to me, non-negotiables, and great footwork is one of them. And you can just speak from my own watching Dave's videos. I mean, they're just fantastic, and he's such a good communicator and has developed his own language around footwork that I think once you buy into it, then you'll never forget what a contact move is ever again. It just seems like it's a great platform. I don't know if you have anything you want to say about Dave and what it was like to work with him.
Absolutely. So Dave was our first fitness coach in state squads in Australia. So he came out of college and we were 12, 13, and he became our fitness coach, and we all became best friends with him. He was just an amazing guy. We had some great players in that program. Jelena Dokic, who got to 4 in the world, some other top 100 players, but he just made fitness fun. So he started off as a fitness coach, and he used to invite us all to where he lived on the weekends. He lived near the beach. We'd all go run up sand dunes and meet together after and have pancakes. And he was just an amazing mentor, just an amazing guy. And instead of fitness being something that was hard and you'd complain about, it was just a fun thing. And he was just such a voracious learner. He was trying to learn from us. Although his dad was a Wimbledon player, played in Wimbledon, he didn't play at a really high level. So it was that superpower that I talked about. He was just like, Pete, well, what do you do on your footwork? Your forehand's great. How does that work? So he was constantly trying to learn, which was fascinating. Then he went off to the States and worked with some of the best players ever, Monica Seles as their fitness coach, and then just became obsessed with footwork and watched 20,000 different clips and developed his own method. And it's just fascinating. And you sort of hear some people and he knows this. They can talk negatively about what he does, that he overcomplicates it, but I just think that's completely wrong. I do think that there's great athletes. If you're an amazing athlete, I do think that you get the footwork and you probably don't need it as much, and he admits that. But if you're not such a great athlete, then developing that, ingraining that muscle memory that you get can help massively. And he has a story on the site where he worked with Emma Raducanu when she was 12 years old, and her dad called and they'd been watching his DVD. So they knew all the moves, and they did a couple of Zoom consultations. And really, when you see her play, you can really see all the different moves in her game. And I'm not sure whether she's the naturally quickest athlete, but she just has this amazing choreographed footwork, which is what Dave would say. He talks about it, that you have to choreograph the footwork almost like a dancer. So yeah, I think that's very important. It's something that you can incorporate in your warm up. So it's difficult when kids have school and so many things going on. But if you just include it in 10 or 15 minutes before every single session as part of your warm up, so you're warming up, but you're ingraining that muscle memory with these tennis specific footwork moves, I think it can be really helpful. But in general, a lot of the coaches think very differently. Like when I was growing up, at 16, I had this amazing coach, and he played on the tour, and he traveled with Roger Federer's coach, Peter Carter. And when they came off the tour, they learned coaching together in Germany, and then they went their separate ways. Peter Carter went to Switzerland. My coach went back to Australia, but he taught me this forehand, the buggy whip, reverse forehand, where you finish behind your head like Nadal. And I became obsessed with that. It helped my forehand massively. I think I had a huge forehand. I had, probably one of the best forehands in the world. My backhand was really weak, but I had a great forehand. And it was because of that, learning that forehand. But 99% of coaches would say that that was wrong. What are you doing? At 16, that was all I did for 6 months was hit that forehand. So then when I started CoachLife, 6 of the coaches on there we're talking about the buggy whip forehand without me prompting them, without me discussing it beforehand, including Robert Lansdorp, who talks about how he taught it to Pete Sampras. Well, he didn't teach it to him. He has a great story. Sorry if I'm waffling on a little bit, but he was feeding balls to Pete and it was shooting off the line, and Pete started doing this. And then Robert noticed that it worked really well. So he started teaching it every day in his sessions. They do 30 or 40 minutes. And then he started teaching it to all his students, to Maria Sharapova and Lindsay Davenport. Maria Sharapova says in her book that on match point, she hit a reverse forehand that she'd learned from Robert. And, you have some of the greatest players in the world hitting it all the time. Alcaraz hits it 60% of the time. Nadal hits it 90% of the time. It's such an important shot. And 6 of the coaches on the platform are talking about it. So it's specialized shots like that where they think differently, a little differently to the textbook. And, you can pick things up like that, which I find is fascinating.
Yeah, that absolutely is. And I think it's amazing having a platform where, so many different pieces of the game are covered just by, from different experts who worked with a lot of top players in a pivotal point in their development. What would you say, overall is the mission? And I think you've touched on this a little bit, but what would you say is, the mission of CoachLife, and and maybe certain goals that you have for the platform?
Yeah, so the mission, when I was growing up, I didn't have the internet, didn't have a lot of coaches, didn't financially, we couldn't afford to have great coaches and travel outside of Australia and get access to that knowledge. I felt like I was quite a bright kid, but I just didn't have access to that knowledge. And now you have the internet, like I was saying, and there is access to a lot of information, but it's just not put together in the right way. So the mission is to just bring that all over the world. So for kids that can't they can't afford to get the best coaches, or they can't afford to travel to different parts of the world, they're able to get this knowledge. Parents are able to better navigate that journey, because I had that difficulty with my parents. So that's part of our mission, is to educate parents and help them improve. And just to create this community, like I really feel like these coaches are the unsung heroes. And I just want to promote them and give them not that they're looking for credit, but just give them the credit that they deserve. In most cases, they've produced 2 or 3 players from the junior stage, from 5 years old right through to 18. So to just create, we're adding one new coach a month, like I said, to create this community where people have access to all this knowledge and they can continually reference it. And we'll continue to improve the platform. We're adding other sports. We've gone to the dark side with pickleball as well. So we're going to launch that in a couple of weeks. So, but we've signed up a lot of great coaches in other sports. They're really keen on the concept. We've got some really big names from the tennis world that are coming on that wouldn't normally do anything like this, but they agree that 99% of the work in developing players is done at the junior level. So yeah, we're just excited to continually grow it, bring it all over the world, and just continually learn. We'd love to get you guys on the platform. We've talked about that before briefly, but in our first call. It's just one thing was although the coaches have some incredible psychological insights and they're really great communicators at dealing with players, but I had a couple of times where I worked specifically with a sports psychologist, and it's just how they might be saying in some ways the same thing that the coaches are saying, but I find the sports psychologists just deliver it in a more understandable, digestible way. And I just wasn't smart enough when I had those couple of times when I had worked with a sports psychologist to continually implement it. Like I worked with a sports psychologist once for a week. I had great results after that. They told me what I should be doing, but I just stopped. I didn't continue doing it. So I think that, for any junior players, it's just really important, and for parents to work with sports psychologists.
Yeah. And in our discussions on this podcast, Josh and I have mentioned Iga Swiatek and his work with Dario Abramovich and like how important that is. And I think we'll start to see more of that at the tour level, even where they're traveling more with their mental coach and it's more, public who they are and so forth. I think Iga's been kind of a pioneer in that. Others have kind of done it more off to the side, and there is sports psychology content on CoachLife, at present. You mentioned the sort of the junior path. I'll be honest, as a senior tennis player, I get a lot out of looking at it, Pete, because I feel like I'm not dead yet, right? So there's still something to be had, learning some of these things from these great coaches. I have actually referred several of my adult clients to Dave Bailey, to seeing his videos, but also like encouraging them to go to Orlando and spend 4 days with him and to learn some of that. So I think there's also content for everybody in this. And I like the idea that we're not just teaching one single forehand, because everybody, right, if you look at the top 20 players in the world on both the men's and the women's side, you're probably looking at 20 different forehands on the men's and the women's side. So there is no one forehand, there's your forehand and how you put it together, and I think you mentioned when we first talked how Iga's kind of closed elbow forehand is really a product of her junior coach. And that's one of the biggest features of her game and her ability to create, spin off of that forehand and being comfortable with it. Even Jannik Sinner has, to an extent, a bent elbow forehand. He's not straight arm like Federer at all, right? So we're talking all these great players, all these different forehands. So I think the individualized aspect of what you can get on something like CoachLife is great. And you've curated some of the best coaches in the world. So you don't have to search in the YouTube search box and not necessarily know what you're getting when you get results there, and you're getting a progression and so forth. So I think it's really great what is happening there. It's exciting. You're moving into other sports. Certainly pickleball is going to be, I think, a unique one, because I work with some pickleball players, and it's very, they're very proud of the fact that it's different than tennis, and there are different skills and there are different ways of training. So I think that would be a really good sport to expand on. And you mentioned all the new coaches. So how are things going with the site? What's sort of next, even just for the tennis side of CoachLife?
Yeah, so we just launched Adriano Fiorivia, our new coach. And in a couple of weeks, we're launching with Dean Hollingworth. You might have had him on your podcast before.
I actually know Dean. He and I did some
Okay.
work at an event in Martha's Vineyard. He's a great guy from Montreal, and he definitely knows his stuff.
Yeah, so he's the tennis specific strength and conditioning trainer. And you talk about pickleball. My son wants to be a professional pickleball player. My daughter wants to be a tennis player. So they argue all the time. She calls it baby tennis. So, but it's absolutely not. I've been playing with him as well. But yeah, they've had trainers in the past, and they've been great trainers, but it's not really tennis specific. Whereas Dean is a tennis specific trainer, and he's working on those tennis specific muscles that you need. And that's all there. It's almost like a full fitness course, and it's laid out exactly what you want to do. So we're launching that in a couple of weeks. We have a speed guy that, my daughter she's pretty slow around the court. So we found this speed trainer, Michael Dratch, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We went there for 3 months last year to see him. And I thought, well, at the end of the 3 months, she's going to be lightning fast. This will fix it all. But she'd actually slowed down. She hadn't slowed down, but her movement at the end of the 3 months was struggling. Now he did brilliant. We're going to get him on the side, but we just stopped doing the tennis specific footwork and the short movements. It was more focused on speed. But he's going to come onto the side, and he's amazing. He works with some of the best athletes in the world. He's a speed coach, teaches you how to be faster. So, that's pretty fascinating. We're going to hopefully get a racket customization business in Melbourne that we've been talking to, and they use artificial intelligence technology to try to figure out what's the best racket for you in terms of weight and brand. And so, yeah, we're constantly trying to improve it. And there's video analysis on the site as well, where you can get your strokes analyzed by some of the coaches, but they're all so different. There's Coco Golf's junior coach, Sly Black. He coached 12 junior world number ones. All three of his own daughters won the Orange Bowl, and he coached Coco and Sloane from 6 to 14 with Coco, 9 to 13. And he was a junior developmental coach, but then you have the Michael Joyce who worked with Sharapova from 14, Pagula from 16, and he's more of the transitional side of it. So we cover sort of everything, where you've got the more technical coaches, you've got the coaches for more beginner stages. So it sort of covers everything. And yeah, we're going to have some webinars on the site as well in a couple of weeks, where you can come on and ask the coaches questions in real time. And we have our Instagram channel where you can see the short clips from all the coaches. That's been pretty popular over the last month or two.
Very cool. Very cool. No, and I think it's also incredible just in the past couple months, right? As a very new platform, just the traction that's there, and how many coaches have gotten involved. So I think it's all really wonderful to see. One question I have, a little bit unrelated, or I guess maybe a little bit of a sidebar from some of the things we've been talking about. It's been, we're in the second week as we're recording this on July 10th. We're in the second week of Wimbledon. I know, many of the junior coaches and developmental coaches of many of the Wimbledon participants have been, are on the platform. I'm curious if you've picked up on any, maybe any themes as you've been watching, some of the matches, either themes that have been also represented on the platform, or just different themes related to the mental side of the game as you've been watching as a, former professional player and coach. I'm curious what some of your observations have been.
Relating it to CoachLife, I see that all the time. Taylor Fritz just lost in 5, made the quarterfinals. His dad coached him from 2 to 18, and he just has such a clean technique. And Guy was just amazing at teaching those fundamentals. But then they joined together with Diego Moyano, who's also on our side, and he worked with Tommy Paul, who also made the quarterfinals of Wimbledon. And you just see Tommy's forehand, and Diego talking about meeting him at 11 years old, and he started coaching him, and he had his forehand was up here. He had an overswing, and then they developed the Cobra forehand, and you can see it exactly with how Tommy Paul hits his forehand. It's a really loose wrist, starting a little lower. So yeah, that's sort of fascinating watching that, and just the mental side of seeing these players compete. I mean, Djokovic is such a warrior competitor. He uses the crowd, and you see him when he has an injury or there's something wrong with him. You see his game go to another level that sort of releases the pressure. I think that's really interesting from what you guys do. Like, it seems like once he has, I'm not saying it's an excuse. I mean, it's a real injury, but once he has that excuse in his head, then his game just goes to that other level. And that can sometimes rub people the wrong way. I don't have a problem with it. He genuinely is injured. But yeah, they're just some fascinating, insights when I'm watching them, like Iga Swiatek talking about the reverse forehand. She went to her coach Mihal and she said, I see Rafa doing this all the time. Should we learn it? And then so they learned that forehand. So I think if Iga Swiatek would hit that forehand a lot more on grass, then I think she'd play a lot better because the ball's shooting through and she's got the big Western grip and she's catching it late. So I think if she was able to hit that one, that would definitely help. But Jasmine Paolini, looking at that improvement mindset, constantly having that goal of improving year after year. We had a junior, I talk about him on every podcast because he's my hero. He was my age in juniors, and he was number 300 in the 18s. I was number 2. You would never think he was going to become a player. He went to college and he just kept improving year after year. Came out of college, wasn't one of the top college players. At 27, he ended up breaking the top 30 in the world and had an amazing career. Peter Lutzak. And you would just see him every day. He had consistent work. He would put in that consistent work. And we had a coach on the platform, Stan Boster, who worked with Andy Roddick and Marty Fish. And we just put a clip of him on Instagram the other day. And he talked about being on an even keel emotionally. So he said, to be a great player, you only need to have 8 good weeks a year, but you need to be in contention all 30 weeks. So I think that's just a brilliant lesson, like not being too up and down with the wins or losses, staying with it, staying in contention all 30 weeks. And that was what my friend Peter Lutzak was able to do. He consistently put in the work. And you see that with Jasmine Paolini. She's just consistently got better and better every year. And she seems to, like we talk about the enjoyment and her attitude on the court. You see her in press conferences and she's so happy, and she's not out there smashing her racket. It comes from a place of pure enjoyment and that constant improvement mindset. So that would be one thing I would notice there. And the same with Tommy Paul. Like, he just has, I think it's just an attitude to model. Like, you hear him. I love watching the press conferences with the players because you learn so much. And he just really analyzes his game. And he said yesterday that although he lost, he feels like every match he's learning something. So if you get caught up in the emotions of the match, of winning, of losing, of anger, then you can't. And that's what happened with me. I was so caught up in the emotions of winning or losing, I couldn't use my brain to try to improve, or what's working, what's not working. And Tommy Paul, he's just able to do that. He's able to analyze, well, what went wrong and what do I need to work on? And he's another player that seems to get better every year. He's just constantly on that upward path. So yeah, that would be some things I would see. I still love tennis, watching it. I think Alcaraz on grass is just very difficult to beat because he hits the ball so hard and the grass just gives it that extra, but then he moves so well. And again, I'm obsessed with this buggy whip forehand. He's able to get out of defensive situations a lot better because of that forehand. And so I just think it's going to be an epic final between Djokovic and Alcaraz. That's my prediction. So, and I think Alcaraz is going to win.
All right. We've got that recorded now. So
yeah,
we'll check in with that next week. But I love one of the themes that you brought up, Pete, because I think it's true of, like, when you see the true greats in all sports, is that they have this kind of insatiable appetite to learn more about what they're doing. And I was showing somebody a video today about Kobe Bryant's perspective, how failure doesn't exist, and that he's not a hate to lose guy or a need to win guy. He's a need to learn guy. He's kind of like right in that middle and doesn't put too much emphasis on either, but puts more emphasis on the learning part. And your story with Jasmine Paolini is good for that, because that's all she's doing. Um, and if you think about it, even something like CoachLife is all about the player who wants to learn more, right? And have good sources for that, and has maybe this appetite to get more into that aspect of the game. So what's the best way for people to, connect with CoachLife? Whether that's on Instagram, on the web, how do people go and find out more?
Yeah, absolutely. And just as an aside to that, just what you said, sorry, is one thing that I think can help the aspiring juniors and parents is to get the kids to take responsibility for their own careers, and to make, because, Roger Federer had that quote where he said that you have to have some luck with the people that coach you when you're a junior, but then again, you decide who coaches you. So, it's getting that ownership and responsibility as a junior to educate yourself and learn more, and parents empowering kids to do that. And I think that's what they can find with CoachLife. And, it's coachlife.com. There's a 7-day free trial, and it is $180 to sign up for the year. We currently have a 50% Independence Day discount. So I'm not sure when you're going to launch this podcast, but it's $180 for the whole year, which is $15 a month, but you pay it annually. And at the moment, 70% of people are converting after our free trial. They're loving the content. Like I said, there's so many categories, but you can find our Instagram page as well under Coach Life Tennis, and you can find some of the short clips there. But again, there's that 7-day free trial where you can cancel anytime just to try the site. We want people just to try it because we think it's so great. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Pete, for sharing your story, the lessons that you've learned through your career in tennis and business, and now what you're doing with CoachLife. So thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well, that was an awesome conversation with Pete, and thanks again, Pete, for coming on and sharing your story and your experiences and everything that you're doing right now. I would say one of my biggest takeaways was actually just hearing about his journey as a professional player, and how he talked about sort of the reputation that he had as a player, and what oh, Peter Clarke, oh, that guy has a tough time handling his emotions, or he acts crazy out there, or things like that. And how then he retired, took some time off from the pro tour, started coaching, and it was actually that process that helped him figure things out, and then came back on tour and was kind of a changed person. And we've had other people that have talked about a similar process, right? We've recently talked to Ryan Harrison. He talked about his learning process, how especially after he retired, how he feels like he completely sees the game differently now. And I think sometimes it does take people that, either that time where maybe they start playing the sport and they need to go through that maturation process, similar to Roger Federer, for instance, how it took him a few years in the start of his career to, really mature, start handling the mental side of the game better. Or whether sometimes it takes a player retiring and even coaching, and when we're coach, we can certainly see the game in a slightly different way as well. So I thought that was really interesting, and I think that also certainly relates a lot to the work that he does today with Coach Life. I also found it very interesting that a lot of it was about his daughter, getting really into the sport, and he wanted to help provide her with those tools. And I think something like Coach Life can be a great platform to to help players throughout the country, through really internationally as well, to gain access to really high level coaches, sort of from the convenience of home. And I think that Pete's experiences as a pro player, as a really high level coach, really informed that. So yeah, love this conversation with Pete, and thanks again for joining us.
I also thought, Josh, it was good to talk to somebody who had made a very successful transition from a competitive playing career to a successful business career, and understanding, all right, what are the skills that we are learning as competitive athletes that we can apply to other contexts of our life. And, Pete brought up the fact that lot of the guys that he grew up with who also did not go to college are still, very successful people in their own right now, just through the skills they learned through being a professional tennis player, a very high level tennis player. And so to me that's interesting, right? Because it's not just about being a great player, and there's going to be a time when the playing career maybe ends, or it's not as much about becoming a professional. So what else are you going to do? Can you make a transition to something else rather than just being caught up in being a tennis player or a competitive athlete? So for him, he was able to transition that, and he got some great advice from that billionaire that he talked about maximizing what you can do in a day. And he's done that. And I agree. The idea of starting CoachLife as a means of really supporting his daughter's career in tennis and wanting to get her the best instruction possible, which then by default is now bringing it to the rest of the world, is a pretty cool mission. And so, I think we both would highly encourage people to check out CoachLife.com and check out the 7-day trial. The quality of the content there is really fantastic. So again, thanks to Pete for being on the podcast. It was a pleasure to talk to you. And that's our show for today. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for the two of us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you are enjoying the content that Josh and I discuss on the show, please rate and review the podcast so other tennis enthusiasts can find it more easily. Additionally, to be notified of new episodes, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube. You can also check us out on Instagram. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership, where you can learn about the benefits of being part of the Tennis IQ podcast community. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.